It is one of the biggest, most shocking turnarounds in all of history. How does a region that was the heart of Christianity for 700 years just disappear? We're talking about the Middle East, North Africa, Roman and Christian to their core, and then, in less than a decade, they fall to Islamic armies. How is that even possible? Well, we're about to find out.
So that's the big question on the table. How does 7 centuries of civilization just get wiped off the map in a flash? This wasn't just a military loss. This was a complete societal implosion. And to really get our heads around it, we've got to go back, not just a few years, but a few hundred years, to find the poison pill that was planted deep inside the empire.
Okay, so our story really kicks off in the 4th century with the guy who changed everything, Emperor Constantine the Great. Now, you probably know him as the emperor who made Christianity legal, who stopped the persecutions. But here's the crazy irony. He's also the guy who created the blueprint for Christians to persecute other Christians.
And this is it. This is the moment where everything changes, the Donatist controversy. For the very first time, a Christian emperor points the Roman army at other Christians. The Donatists, they were these hardliners in North Africa, and they had a theological beef. Constantine tried a couple of church meetings, they didn't work, so he just sent in the legionaries to take their churches. That was it. A line was crossed, and there was no going back.
Now, you want to see what this really looked like? Check out this timeline. It's absolute whiplash. In 325, at the famous Council of Nicaea, Constantine comes down like a hammer for Nicene orthodoxy. He exiles his enemies, he burns their books. But then, just a few years later, he does a complete 180. He realizes Arianism is still a big deal, so he brings back the heretic Arius and kicks out the Nicene hero Athanasius. And the final proof? On his deathbed, he gets baptized by an Arian bishop. You see, this was never about theological truth. It was about power. It was about whatever kept the empire in one piece.
When you put his policies side by side like this, it's unbelievable. It's a total reversal. Theology wasn't the goal. It was the tool. It was a lever of state control. The specific belief didn't matter as much as making sure everyone believed the same thing, whatever that thing happened to be that day.
And if you think this brutal logic was just for the church, think again. The very same year as his big council, he had his own son executed. Then his wife. The message could not have been clearer. If you are a threat to unity, whether you're my family or a faction in the church, you will be eliminated. And that terrifying logic was now fused to the Christian faith.
Okay, let's fast forward to the 6th century. What started out as one emperor's political strategy is about to get carved into stone. We're talking about the law of the land itself under Emperor Justinian. Persecution was about to become official, bureaucratic, and inescapable.
So Justinian's code comes up with this horrifying new legal concept called civil death. And what it meant was that if you were a Christian who didn't toe the official state line on theology, you weren't just wrong, you were a criminal, you were a traitor. In the eyes of the state, you literally ceased to be a person with rights.
And this wasn't just a label. Oh no, this had teeth. You couldn't inherit your family's property. Forget about holding any kind of public office. Want to be an officer in the army? Nope. It was a slow, systematic legal strangulation of any Christian community that dared to think for itself. The empire was literally hollowing itself out. And now we're right on the doorstep of the collapse, the early 7th century. All that legal machinery for persecution is now running at full tilt, and it's reached its most bloody and brutal phase in places like Egypt and Syria. The main targets? The Miaphysite Christians. You know them as Copts and Syriacs, all because they had a different way of understanding Jesus.
And meet the man who lit the final fuse, Cyrus of Alexandria. The emperor basically gave him the keys to the kingdom in Egypt, total political and religious power. He had one job, force everyone to conform, and he went about it with a truly terrifying passion.
I mean, just let this sink in. This isn't abstract law anymore. This is Mina, the brother of the Coptic Pope, being tortured with fire, then stuffed in a sack and drowned in the river. This is the Christian Roman Empire sending a message of pure terror to its own Christian people.
And this stuff was happening all over. Famous monks like Saint Samuel here were beaten by imperial soldiers until they were permanently maimed just for what they believed. So let me ask you, after decades of this, would you fight and die for an empire that does this to you? Of course not. You'd have zero loyalty. In fact, you'd probably be praying for anyone to deliver you.
And right on cue, a deliverer arrived. This is where all those centuries of tyranny finally come home to roost. A huge spiritual and political vacuum had been created, and into that vacuum rode the armies of Islam. And what happened next? Well, it wasn't really a conquest. It was a collapse.
When you break it down, the logic is brutally simple. Step 1, the empire spends centuries turning its own people into bitter enemies. Step 2, those people completely lose any reason to defend their oppressors. And step 3, when a new army shows up, the locals either just stand aside, or in some cases, they actually welcome them as liberators.
But hey, don't just take it from me. Listen to John of Nikiu. He was a Coptic bishop who actually lived through this whole thing. He didn't see the Arab armies as just another invader. He saw them as an instrument of divine judgment. He called them God's chastening rod, sent to punish the arrogant Byzantine Empire for its horrific cruelty. Just like God had punished ancient Israel for its sins, now the church was losing its land because of its own.
So the big question is, if the East was this rotten, hollowed-out structure, why didn't Western Europe fall too? The Islamic expansion was eventually stopped there, and the reason why tells us the other half of this story. The West was just built differently.
I mean, look at the difference. It's night and day. The East was this giant, centralized empire obsessed with internal purity tests and purges. It was hollow. The West, on the other hand, was this messy collection of different kingdoms. Their energy was pointed outward, sending missionaries to convert pagan tribes. So when invaders came to the West, people fought for their homes, for their communities, not for some distant tyrannical emperor. They were, you could say, a fresh vine.
This whole table just lays out the story perfectly. You can just track the escalation in the East over 300 years, from seizing churches to seizing property to torture and drowning. Then you look at the West in the 8th century with Charles Martel, and what do you see? Defensive warfare. It's a completely different energy. One world was eating itself alive, the other was fighting to survive.
So, what's the big lesson here? When you look back at this incredible story of collapse, what's the warning that it sends down to us today?
Well, I think it boils down to this. Unity that you have to force on people isn't real unity. It's just a performance. It's a brittle, fragile shell, and underneath, it's just full of resentment. The Byzantine Empire demanded perfect unity, and in the end, it created a population that was so broken, so alienated, that it saw foreign invaders as a better option.
And that really leaves us with this final question to chew on. Whether we're talking about an ancient empire or a modern country, a political movement or a religious group, if your unity has to be enforced by power, by threats, by force, is it ever really unity at all? It's a question this piece of history demands we answer.